Today on The State of Us, Apple plans to have iPhones detect child pornography, fueling a privacy debate, and the U.S. government wants a greater role in how Americans access the internet. Welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined today by your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson. And we've got a lot on the docket today. The new system from Apple will use new techniques in cryptography, artificial intelligence to identify child sexual abuse material, which of course raises the question, Apple's going to be looking at all my photos? Well, only for the bad stuff, right? Well, maybe. And the U.S. government is looking to expand, particularly under the Biden administration, broadband connection as a basic necessity, recasting that decades-old ideology about internet being a luxury. Now we're saying that it might be a necessity. And what does that look like for rural America? We've got a lot to talk about, Lance, but before we get going, what is the word of the day?
Does Apple have empery over their data? Empery, E-M-P-E-R-Y. It means the sovereignty of an empire or broad dominion or authority. Does Apple have the empery over the data that they collect? Or is it public domain? Is it something that authorities should be able to look into to find evil that is lurking behind the power that is Apple?
So over the past number of years, Lance, I think it's safe to say that Apple has basically built a huge part of its brand image around its promises to safeguard users' privacy. And this new software that it's rolling out says that it's going to further enhance those protections by avoiding any need for widespread scanning of images on the company's servers, something that Apple currently doesn't perform. So the article explains that after news of Apple's plans leaked out Wednesday, critics said that they worried that by building software that can flag illegal content belonging to its users, Apple may be softening its stance on how it protects users' data via encryption, a source of growing contention between the technology giant and law enforcement organizations over the past decade. You and I covered that whole conversation, whatever that was, 2 or 3 years ago, right? Where the authorities wanted to get into an iPhone and Apple basically said, we can't. And then the authorities said, well, if you really can't, then build us the thing that can. And then they said no, because that would set a dangerous precedent.
I think it had to do with a criminal shooting in California or something like that was an instance where, and they said, yeah, can't do that, right? It's because otherwise our whole business model's shot.
Basically, because their whole thing to people, right, is that you're safer on an iPhone than you are other places. It's one of their things, right? You're safer, more unified system, easier to use, all these many things.
Well, you have privacy, right?
Yes.
Safer in, not safer physically, but safer in that your information can't be found out, right? Is that their argument?
Yeah. That's, I guess it's hard to say exactly what Apple's argument is, but that's my impression of what their argument is. To be clear, though, about this new thing, the software will detect illegal images, but it won't work on videos. And basically, the article explains that Apple's system will use new techniques in cryptography and artificial intelligence to identify child sexual abuse material when it is stored using iCloud photos, according to the company. Using software that runs on both the iPhone and Apple's cloud, Apple will detect whether images on the device match a known database of these illegal images. If a certain number of them, Apple declined to say exactly how many, are uploaded to iCloud Photos, Apple will review the images. If they're found to be illegal, Apple says it will report them to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, a private nonprofit that was established in 1984 under a congressional mandate that serves a clearinghouse for reports of child abuse. On the surface, right? Who doesn't want to stop child sexual abuse material? Yes, obviously. The question, though, I think is raised about what's the accuracy of this going to be?
Right. Well, and what's the empery of Apple to have the power to determine what is and isn't child pornography? Don't we have an entire part of the penal code and detectives and people who are in charge of those kinds of things in a court system to make those decisions? What gives Apple the right to determine what is and isn't going to be reported. Therein is the nutshell, right? I mean, it's like what is and isn't. Well, that's for society. That's for the lawmakers. That's for the court system to decide. And here, Apple is up on high saying, we're in charge and we'll determine what we're going to give you. And this is the way we're going to give it to you, because our privacy as a company is more important than child pornography. I mean, to me, that's what I'm hearing. And it's like, okay, we're going to give you this little snippet so you get off our back. And it's like, well, don't we need to demand more from Apple as a society, because they're protecting people that are doing things that we think are not right as a society? Again, I'm not going to get into right, wrong, whatever, but as a society, we've deemed these activities as immoral and horrible and bad and blah, blah, blah. So isn't Apple taking place? Aren't they running their company within our society? So don't they have to follow our societal rules? I mean, to me, it's so obvious, but it's like, well, they haven't had to. They've been able to look at police and say, yeah, never mind, that goes against our company policy, so we're not going to cooperate with you. Well, who else is allowed to do that?
Facebook's allowed to do that.
Well, no, we'll see, right? Because Facebook's
maybe
been taking a beating thanks to us reporting it first, and then all the major news outlets coming out with it the following weekend after we had done our 3-part series. That's why you're here, folks, because we give it to you first.
First and the best, right?
Exactly, first and the best. So if the major people are doing it after us, obviously it's something that they thought was needed to be heard by the masses, and we're getting it to you before them. Another reason to tell your friends, send out the emails, let them know about us. But that's my take with Apple, is that where do they get off thinking that they're so high and mighty? And it's because, well, we allow them to.
Well, I think it's the same empery that they use in their app store, right? And that's this idea that it's our app store. You're on a phone that you bought from us, and to use the phone, you agree to make use of our services through a terms of service. So if Lance wants to put his app on our app store, then we get to decide who gets to use it, when they get to use it, and how much they have to pay, and how much the people that made the app have to pay. We have a complete control over that system. Now, obviously, in recent court proceedings, there's some give in that. It's not going to be exactly what it always was. But my point is, I think that it stems from the same place, right? The notion is, well, you've agreed to use iCloud. You willingly bought an iPhone. Nobody made you do those things. And that is now going to be a prerequisite. So if you're going to use these things, you'll just have to accept that we're going to look at your photos. And if we see something that we think is illegal, then we're going to report it to the appropriate authorities.
So this is good, right?
It raises the question of, at what cost do we want privacy, right? Which we've talked about a lot, I feel like, on the State of Us. Do you want to stop child abuse images from being circulated? If the answer is yes, which I assume for hopefully everybody listening to the show, it is, then the next question is, how far are you willing to go to stop it, right? What are you willing to sacrifice in the name of stopping it? Because the reality is, I mean, let's just all be honest, Apple's system's not going to be perfect, right? For example, something that's probably going to happen, almost assuredly, is there's going to be some explicit photos that are of consenting adults that get flagged by this system and are relayed to human beings at Apple, and people there are going to view your, private explicit photos that are not illegal.
If you're taking pictures of it, I understand it's not illegal, but aren't you, by taking a picture, giving up your privacy? I mean, it's like, well, no, wait a minute. You never know what's going to happen. The cleaning lady's going, is going through and you've left the pictures out. You've had them printed or whatever, and the cleaning lady's coming in and she finds them. It's like, well, you just lost your privacy there. I mean, once you take the image, even though it's legal, you've lost this little bit of privacy, haven't you? I'm playing devil's advocate with you. I'm not against it. It's consenting adults. I mean, it's all good with me, but I have a hard time with, well, I did this, so it's private. Well, if you're taking pictures of it, I think at that point you've lost some of your validity to privacy.
I learned this the other day, and it's interesting because I want to see how it applies to this. The idea of taking photos of strangers, right? Because, I mean, we think about like in schools and stuff, right? You sign a thing that says it's okay for, my child to be photographed, or you have to sign a thing saying it's not okay for my child to be photographed. But generally speaking, if Lance is out there walking down the street in public, right, and I want to take a photo of him, I can do it. What if I drive out to where Lance lives and I'm standing in the middle of the road and Lance is standing on his property and I take a photo of him? Is that legal? No, it's not. Unless it's strictly for editorial purpose. And even then it's real sketchy. If you're taking a picture of somebody on their private property, if you're using something that is privately theirs, you're crossing the line then. Now, in practice, obviously, that's been a difficult thing over the years to, iron out, but that is how the law is set up. I mean, very generally, I'm not, a lawyer, so all of our legal experts out there can send us an email and tell me why that's really stupid what I just said. But generally, that's what I understand the law to be is, if you're out in public property and the other person's in public, you can certainly take a photo of them. The other thing, though, is you're limited. You can't use it for commercial purposes. Even if we're in public, so Lance and I are out standing on the sidewalk, I take a photo of him. If I take his photo and I go make a boatload of money off of it without Lance's permission, not kosher.
Right.
I have to get Lance's permission to use it commercially.
Right.
So the reason I'm bringing all this up is because I'm wondering what type of lawyerly legal things are going to come up as a result of this.
Gotcha.
Apple didn't take the photo, but Apple's using somebody's photo, which may have been privately taken in their home. I don't know. Yeah, again, I'm not sure, but I could see there maybe being some problems there with saying it doesn't matter that it's your phone. It doesn't matter what your terms of service say. You're violating a federal law by crossing that line and taking and looking at somebody's private photos, because we have a lot of laws regarding photographs and how they can be used. We as a society have said legally that if you're on your private property, it's not okay for somebody to take a photo of you and use it for their own purposes. Doesn't matter if what you're doing is legal, illegal. It doesn't matter what you're doing on your property. It's not okay for me to go stand in the street and try to be a peeping Tom and get a picture of you, right? That's not okay.
I get your point with the legality of it. Mine is more of an esoteric out there that if you're taking pictures of something, you have to think about the ability of others then to see your private moments. That's going to happen. Just like writing down your thoughts. Well, it's in my diary, so it's my private thoughts. Oh, wait a minute. You love to read John Adams's private thoughts. Well, so where's his privacy? Because he put it down in his diary in his house, on his porch, and now it's out there for millions to read what his thoughts were on that day. So where's that that's my point. You see what I'm saying is that I understand the legal things of privacy, but once you put it down, once you take a picture of it, you're starting to lose a little bit of privacy, which is why my argument is counter to the people who say, well, Apple's all about privacy and they're ruining my privacy. No, they're not, because if you took pictures, you've already lost a little bit of privacy just by the act of taking pictures.
Well, I think it's this fundamental question of we've struggled with over the many years of our country's existence, the notion of privacy. We believe there is a right to it, but what constitutes when you have that right is tricky and it's gray. And that's part of what we're talking about, because again, most of us probably don't want there to be rampant child pornography on iPhones. We probably mostly agree that that shouldn't be there. But and then the question becomes, where does that end? And does Apple really have the right to do that? And that comes back to this fundamental question of, do you have a right to privacy on your phone? Which we've talked about some, but we're going to continue talking about. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. The Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution provides that, quote, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation. And see, here's one where I think this almost feels like there's got to be a problem here with the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution, because Apple is looking through these things. Apple is, one, they're not a law enforcement agency, so I mean they can't issue a warrant anyway. And they're looking through all this stuff without probable cause anyway. So again, we've talked about two different things, right? The legal side of, I think Lance and I both feel like it feels like there could be a big weedy mess here that Apple's wading into, because I think there's going to be a lot of legal questions posed about, I mean, just a layperson's understanding, right, of what the Fourth Amendment says and how copyright law works with photos. And it just seems like, man, it feels like there's a, there's a lot of potential problems here.
Well, which is why Apple's tried to avoid it by saying, well, this is all about privacy.
Right.
Because then you avoid all those things. But they're getting such pressure from the public through law enforcement or from the public saying, yeah, but we want to stop these things that we think are bad. So therefore you need to open up. And so now Apple's making a business decision, which will then turn into, and again, we've said it here before, these are all things that need to be decided by the courts. This whole concept of technology, iPhones, taking pictures on a phone stuff is so new. We don't have a lot of judicial decisions on it. And we need to make some. And we need to have some legislative decisions made on it. We need to have some laws written for this because it's new. It's just like when we introduced airplanes and when we introduced automobiles. When you get new technology, you have to write new laws. And it's difficult to write new laws when the technology is so new, nobody really knows anything about it, right? And I'm sure when the automobile first came around, there were really no speed limits around because nobody had any concept, I mean, I guess you could say you could only drive your horse at 10 miles an hour. I don't know how they would determine that, but, think of all the things we have now with TSA and the airlines. Well, they didn't have any of those laws before because airplanes hadn't been made. So we can adapt the Constitution to this new technology. And maybe it's just time for us to do that. And we've been talking about that as well.
Back when the Constitution was written, I go out, buy a piece of paper from my local general store, buy the pen, bring everything back to my house, and I write something down. I don't think that there's a big question there about who owns the pen, who owns the paper, and who owns what's on the paper. I mean, that's all pretty, I paid for it all. It's all in my house, my property, and it's my thoughts that I wrote down. There's not a lot of ambiguity there in the delivery of me putting the words on the paper. When you get into an iPhone, you might say, well, I bought the iPhone. You're right, you did. But for the iPhone to work, you are using Apple's services.
I'm paying service.
You are using a cellular service. And some of those things are free and some of them are not. And so you get in this really...
And some of them are governed by the FCC, right? Which is a government regulation.
Yeah.
So therefore, the government now has a say-so in what can be produced or parlayed over those lines or those entities.
And so I think and that's where it gets sticky, right? Because it's not as simple as when the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution was written, which is that generally, if it's in your house, there's really no way for anybody to access it other than to come into your house and take it from you, right? I mean, that's like if you're going to look at something that's in somebody else's house back in 1770s through 1980s, maybe, the only way that you were going to see something that somebody else had or really examine something was to go physically take it from them because there wasn't really another way to look at it. And now we've introduced this whole complexity of, well, it's yours, but it's stored on somebody else's server. So, what right do they have to it then? And it kind of reminds you of the whole landlord and renter sort of debate that we've had over the years about, well, it's your home, but somebody else owns it. So what's their right to enter it? What type of notice do they have to give you? What are the, and so I imagine to your point, Lance, we need to answer some of those questions because it is unclear. I think the most simple answer is, as we've talked about and are going to talk about with broadband, cell phones have become a ubiquitous part of American life. And in many ways, they have become an essential part of American life. The chances that you're going to get a job or transact business or engage in social life without a phone at all, it's pretty minimal. You know what I mean? Yes, it can be done, right? It is possible. There are communities you could go live in or ways of life that you could opt for, and you could do it, but it's becoming increasingly less feasible to do it. And the vast majority of Americans rely on their phone every day, even your friendly redneck liberal, to be part of the world, even with a non-smart smartphone, it's part of life. And so I think it demands an answer to the question of, is what's on that phone yours or not, And if it's yours, then it's subject to the protections, of the Fourth Amendment, I think. And if it's not, then people need to know that, because I think that vastly changes what you're comfortable putting on your phone.
Makes sense to me.
We need to answer the question. And to answer the question, we have to have a better debate about it, because what happens is little tidbits like this get put out, and it's a way for Apple to slowly ease us all into the concept, because, they're starting with something, again, that's widely objectionable, right? Most people want to stop this. But maybe the next step is, well, we're going to scan photos for illegal drugs. Okay, well, in some states, that would include marijuana, right? Well, now what kind of can have we opened up? But we already did it with the child images. So this is just a small step right in the next direction. And before you know it, you have been eased into this whole world of Apple's going to scan your photos for anything that society may or may not like. And, God knows what happens then.
Well, but that's what's going to happen, people. And the debate needs to take place, and let's get out ahead of it, and let's be proactive instead of reactive. But, all of this gets slowed down if you don't have good internet access. And how important is that? Not to this question necessarily, but overall business, right? How do you function? You talk about me and without the smartphone and stuff, and it makes it difficult, because so many things that I want are on the internet and can be ordered that way, and opportunities and sales and better prices and faster delivery and more choices. But hey, if I live out in the hills and the valleys, I don't get reception, or I don't get dependable reception. We found out with schools, but in education, but I can't even function within the business of the world economy anymore, or at least not to the level that everybody else gets to. And if I'm not able to participate, then that hurts the economy, right? So should the government take a more active role in getting more Americans better internet? Because if that happens, then the economy grows.
Government estimates say about 14 million Americans live in areas without high-speed internet as of 2019, but public officials acknowledge that the data is incomplete, and private estimates put the figure at 40 million or higher. So you have a fair share of Americans that don't have access to internet at all. Any high-speed internet. And then you get into this whole other one that's like the underserved, right? Which I envision as our area, where technically there's high-speed internet, but depending on the time of day and depending on how many people are using it, it may not really be high speed, and your ability to really do anything may be severely limited. And Lance and I went through that firsthand, right? When the pandemic rolled out, we were not doing the show in person at that point, and Lance, maybe for the first time, was really hit head on with this. I can't do my job if we don't do something about my internet at home.
Well, and it's also tough too, because, you talk about, my daughters talk about, all these shows that I can stream, and I can quote stream with my internet, but the main thing I stream are my baseball games. And I can't tell you, it's 4 or 5 times a game I have to reconnect to continue to watch. So it's like, really, this streaming stuff? It's like, I'll just keep my cable. And if I'm given a choice between the game I want to watch is on cable versus streaming it, I watch the cable because it's a dependable way to watch. If I stream it, I'm going to have to restart it 3 or 4 times during the 9-inning game. Yeah, it's just that the connection went down. You hit it, start it back up, and after the 30, 40-second delay, and it's like, wait a minute, I'm doing this because I don't have to watch commercials, yet I'm restarting it. So I think I'm in one of these places where I'm not getting the same service that my daughters get in, the metropolitan areas where they live. And therefore it makes it hard to, not impossible, but hard to talk to them about things, because it's like, yeah, that's not the world I'm living in. Through no fault of my own, because you say, well, you're just too cheap, you redneck liberal. You're not paying enough money for it. I'm paying top dollar for the services that are offered in my area. You can't get a higher level or a higher speed than what I'm paying for. I'm paying for the top thing that they send individuals that you can have in your own private household.
And that's what the U.S. government's looking to possibly address, right, in the infrastructure bill, is to say, hey, we gotta pay attention to this broadband thing. We got to do things to shore up existing systems, overhaul existing systems, and expand it to make sure that anybody that wants it has it. And it's very reminiscent of that age of electricity and the telephone and these other things. And so we're going to talk about, does the U.S. government have an empery? Is there any sovereignty here for the U.S. government to say, hey, this is going to be our domain now? Because really the whole industry is mostly grown up without the government being big on regulating it. They've helped, but they've not done a lot to say, do this, do that, do this, do that. So do we want that to change? Does it have to change? To find out, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. Does the United States government have an empery on broadband? And not just broadband. I think we have to use internet more broadly, because, frankly, anything less than broadband is pretty much impractical at this point, right? You're not going to have dial-up. The number of people with DSL continues to decrease. And you're looking at, you got to have high-speed internet, right? Because you're just not going to stream. You're not going to do your video calls. You're not going to do online school. You're not going to do online work. You're just not going to do it without high-speed internet.
Well, companies are connecting that way. They're operating under that assumption that people have it. So if you don't, you're not able to interact with the companies that maybe you want to do business with, because they're just assuming that everybody has it, because most people do. And so that's the business model they're working under. And so if you don't, you can't participate in the same thing that everybody else is.
So we're going to try to get something from the friendly redneck liberal, which he always loves, which is an answer on a question.
All right.
Is it time?
I always give an answer.
Is it time to classify internet as a utility legally? In the same way that we have electric companies out there that are private, but that the government's heavily involved in making sure that people have equal access to.
Yes. There you go.
Ta-da. Okay, show's over.
You never, you always say, well, you never just say yes or no. There you go. I said yes. To me, and I've told you this off air, but to me, this is just the same thing as the Tennessee Valley Authority during the Great Depression. There's the historical tie-in here, is that the federal government decided during the Great Depression for jobs and everything else. But, there was the Rural Electrification Association, REA, that there were people out in America, in the middle of America, who didn't have electricity, who weren't participating in what everybody else was. And this was a way to get it to them, to create jobs for people to build it and to access it and everything else. And so we have, electricity and getting the electricity to the rural areas and phones and everything else under the auspices of these different government organizations. And to me, broadband internet is the same concept. It is something that will improve all Americans' lives if they have access to it. So the government needs to make sure that everybody has the best access they can to it, just like electricity, just like telephones, all of those things. And I know some of you are, what are you talking about telephones? All you got to do is go to your local Apple Store or Walmart and pick up a phone. What are you talking about? Well, it didn't used to be that way. You had to run lines and there were poles up and you connected it to your house and wires from your house to the pole to the phone company. And the government said, you know what? This is important enough. And wow, we got to 98, 99% of American homes had electricity and had television thanks to the government. Well, to me, broadband is the internet is just as important as all of that was. And we need to get that number up to that 98, 99%. Basically, if you want it, you have it. Because there's always going to be 1 or 2% maybe says, I don't want it. Okay, it's different if you choose not to have it than not being able to get it if you want it. And I think it's time for the government to do that. So simple answer 2 minutes ago, yes.
Well, we knew that the simple would be followed by the longer.
Well, you kind of stared at me like, are you going to say something? I'm like, well, I answered your question. Yes.
I knew there was more thoughts.
And then you ended the show, but I just told you why it was a simple yes. I gave you the historical reference and the personal significance of why I think it's important. Yeah, I think it's time. It's time to do this.
Well, we're allowing companies to gouge consumers like Lance for service that's really not very good because there's no other choice, and there's nothing stopping them really from doing it. I mean, yes, there are existing laws that sort of prohibit that, but they're loose and they're light and they're hard to enforce and hard to prove and yada, yada, yada.
Well, I pay more for cable living where we do than if I lived in Columbus, and I have fewer stations and crappier service with my cable. And I've said that for the 40 years that I've lived out here in rural America. When I left the city, is because all in the city, but I had 4 different companies to choose from in the city. So competition, oh wow, competition makes for better prices and better service. And here in rural America, we lack the competition because there aren't enough of us for companies to invest in coming out here. So whoever got here first typically has a corner on the market, which means in a capitalist society, they can charge you whatever they want and they can give you whatever services you want. Because again, I can complain till the cows come home, to use a rural saying there. But if I don't go through the service I have, I don't get to watch my Major League Baseball games. It's a one and done service. That's my only opportunity. So I can complain all I want, but you say, well, just do something else. Well, I can't. They're the only game in town. It's the only service that I'm able to get. So I can complain all I want. I can threaten all I want, and they don't have to improve service because I can't go anywhere else.
I think it's important to remind people too that, right? I mean, when government has gotten involved in this stuff historically, it is still a public-private partnership. It's not the government just stepping in and doing everything for everyone.
Right. I don't pay the government for my electricity.
Exactly. But the government has very specific regulations in place about what companies can and cannot do, because we've all decided, I mean, if somebody came out tomorrow and said, we're going to make electricity like broadband, I mean, we'd all be like, whoa, no, I don't think so. Because we all accept that as just a part of everyday life. I mean, so much of what we do, almost everything involves electricity, our ability to connect with people, right? You don't have the internet without electricity. So it's become such an essential component of life that we have said we're okay with the government having a pretty big role in this because we don't want to risk people not having access to this. And having fair and equal access to this. And I think I agree with Lance. I mean, that's the point that we're at with internet. It needs to be that way because things will get better for everybody as a result of it. And we'll get to the point where companies don't promise X speed and then not deliver it because of capacity issues. And it's all spelled out in the contracts. I'm not begrudging the companies. They're doing what they can inside of the regulations, and you don't understand it, you don't understand it. And for most people's homes, that's fine because they generally don't need the speed they're being sold anyway. But then when you do need it and it's not there, then suddenly it's like, whoa, what happened? I thought XYZ. And it's like, well, no, actually ABC. And it says right here in the contract, and the government has the opportunity, much like it did with electricity, to say, yeah, you can't do A, B, and C anymore. If you say XYZ, you got to do XYZ. And you have to do these things to make the prices clear to people of what they're paying and what they get. And you have to, all the things that, again, the private companies can still make money. I mean, the government's going to spend a huge portion to help them build out this infrastructure.
That's the other side of it. And the government takes it over. The private businesses are going to still do very well because they're going to be able to then sell services to people who they currently can't sell the service to because they don't want to spend the money to do it. So before the big businesses start to complain about the government stepping into their territory, they need to realize, and the listener need to realize, the government doing this is going to allow big business to make even more money because more people are going to be able to access things. It's like when we order things, it's very hard for us to do it out here where we live. If it were easier to do, if we had a stronger connection, a more reliable connection, we might do it even more, which means then it's going to help business grow even more. So before big business starts crying wolf and saying, oh, that we don't want the government in doing our stuff. No, I think they probably will tell you privately that they're very happy if the government would do this because it would help their business model, which is, wait a minute, now you have the people benefiting, you have business benefiting, you have the economy benefiting. Why wouldn't this be a good thing to do?
I'll just say the last thing to leave people with, Lance, is all the more reason if the government's stepping in to get involved in this to answer some of those questions about privacy. Because Americans hate when private companies violate privacy, but I think there's almost nothing that we hate more than when the government violates our privacy. And while Lance and I think, are both in favor of the government getting involved in broadband, we're also very much in favor of getting the questions answered about privacy prior to the government wading in waist deep into this issue of helping provide internet to everybody, because it does raise those questions about, well, is the government then going to scan all of my images and photos and messages and everything? Will privacy basically be completely gone? And I'm not saying it would be, but I am saying, I think to me, then that's the next step. Okay, it's a utility. Let's make sure that we answer the questions about privacy now.
Privacy is not emperor. It is not trivial. It is something we all very much believe in and want to keep as much as possible. But again, here we go. We're talking about some of the big issues of the day here at True Chat, and that is part of our mission statement. And that is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And we've done it again here today. Opened up, the box of privacy versus big business and access to the internet. So as you're talking to your friends and family, and they say, "Well, that sounds like kind of an interesting show. How do I get it?" Tell them. They can find us on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The State of Us is available Tuesdays and Thursdays as a podcast early in the morning and on the weekends in select AM and FM talk radio markets around the country. Today's competition, Lance slides in with a narrow 5-4 win. So another close one. I think all-time record Lance has got the winning streak going here.
I've got the advantage, though. I get to choose the word, so it's built-in advantage to the game. Built-in advantage.
So anyway, you all keep track at home. Let us know what you find out and any other comments. Send us an email, podcast@thestateofus.org. For The State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to our producer, Bradley Butch, and thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.